When the wine had reached the middle of the feast, Cao Cao suddenly asked, "You must know who the heroes of this age are," then pointed at himself, and said the sentence that nearly frightened Liu Bei out of his soul. "In all the world, the true heroes are only you and I." The chopsticks in Liu Bei's hand fell to the ground. He immediately used the thunder as an excuse. "Only by disguising yourself as a harmless white rabbit can you numb the vigilance of the tiger."
Understanding the mysterious East, interpreting the timeless classics. Welcome to Mysterious East.
Chapter 2, The Price of Legitimacy. In the previous chapter, we saw how the Han Empire began to collapse, how Liu Bei's small team entered the stage, and how Cao Cao used danger itself to win political reputation. But after Dong Zhuo burned Luoyang and fled west, the so-called alliance of heroes began to reveal its true nature. They drank wine, exchanged cups, and made excuses. They claimed that the army lacked provisions. They said the horses were exhausted. In short, they simply refused to move. They had come to oppose Dong Zhuo not because they truly cared about the emperor or the Han Dynasty. They had come to gain political capital. Now that Dong Zhuo had fled and territory had been left open, what they cared about was how to seize land. Who still cared whether the emperor lived or died? Cao Cao was furious. He led his troops forward alone in pursuit. But in the end, he fell into an ambush and nearly lost his life. This crushing defeat finally awakened Cao Cao completely. Relying on men like these could never save the realm. The so-called alliance of warlords was nothing more than a gathering of opportunists. There were no shared values. There was only temporary interest binding them together. Once the external pressure weakened and Dong Zhuo withdrew, their internal conflicts immediately exploded. The modern lesson here is extremely profound. In business cooperation, never blindly believe in so-called strong alliances or large platform partnerships. If there is no unified command center and no deep mechanism for distributing interests, this kind of alliance is often more fragile than scattered sand. When you place your hopes entirely on others, you are already not far from failure. The collapse of the alliance came even faster than expected. The first to rush into the ruins of Luoyang was Sun Jian, the fierce tiger of Jiangdong. Inside a dry well, he discovered something deadly. The imperial seal. This stone, carved with the words, "Received from heaven, may the mandate live long and prosper," instantly awakened the greed deep inside Sun Jian's heart. He believed that by possessing the imperial seal, he could possess the realm. But he did not understand that this was not a treasure. It was a death warrant. In order to hide the imperial seal for himself, Sun Jian secretly withdrew. But on his way back, he was intercepted by Liu Biao's forces. A great star of the age fell. He died beneath a storm of blades. Sun Jian's death tells us one brutal truth. When your strength is not yet enough to support your ambition, possessing a core resource too early may bring disaster upon you. The imperial seal itself had no power. Its power came from the person who was able to control it. After this, the anti-Dong Zhuo alliance completely dissolved. The realm entered an even more chaotic age of divided warlords. Liu Bei continued to wander, searching for a place where he could finally settle. Sun Ce took his father's old followers and waited patiently in Jiangdong, enduring in silence until the time was right. And Cao Cao, after the collapse of his idealism, began his true transformation. He no longer fantasized about relying on others. Instead, he returned to his own base, recruited soldiers, gathered horses, and built his own core team. The story that follows belongs to those political players who truly understood how to operate power. Cao Cao was about to reach one of the most important turning points of his life. Welcoming Emperor Xian of Han. This was not merely a military action. It was a strategic acquisition powerful enough to change the direction of history. What does it mean to hold the emperor in order to command the warlords? This was not only a political trick. It was the highest level use of legitimacy as an asset. At this stage, the competition was no longer about who shouted the loudest. It was about who had the sharper political vision. At this moment, the wandering emperor, Emperor Xian of Han, was drifting helplessly on the road back to Luoyang like a homeless dog. Li Ju, Guasi, and the other military strongmen from the Liang region drove him forward like shepherds driving sheep. The dignity of the imperial court had been swept to the ground. One of Yuan Shao's advisors raised his hand and suggested that they receive the emperor. But Yuan Shao found the idea troublesome. He thought placing an emperor above his own head would only create discomfort. Look carefully. This was exactly the limitation of Yuan Shao. He only saw the emperor as a burden. He failed to see the invisible asset behind the emperor. But Cao Cao was different. At this time, Cao Cao had just absorbed 300,000 yellow turban troops from Qingzhou in Shandong. For the first time, he truly possessed a base of manpower and grain that belonged to him. When he heard that the emperor was in distress, his advisor Sun Yu spoke a famous line that would echo through history. Du Quan of Jin received King Xiang of Zhou, and the feudal lord submitted. Gaozu marched east against Xiangyu, and the realm turned its heart toward him. This sentence struck directly into Cao Cao's soul. He immediately understood. This was not merely rescuing the emperor. This was seizing the moral high ground. It was like taking over an existing shell of authority, a move with extremely low cost and extremely high return. So Cao Cao moved decisively. He escorted Emperor Xian of Han to Xuchang. This move became known as holding the emperor in order to command the warlords. Cao Cao himself called it serving the Son of Heaven in order to command those who refuse to obey. This became the core business model of Cao Cao's entire political group. From that moment on, every official order issued by Cao Cao became an imperial decree. Whoever Cao Cao attacked could be labeled a rebel. This kind of political dimensional strike instantly allowed Cao Cao to open a gap between himself and the other warlords. This gives us a clear lesson. In business competition, it is not enough to keep your head down and work hard. You must also raise your head and look at the road ahead. So-called opportunities are often created by the strong. And knowing how to find leverage from a weaker position, using the rules, or even using the emperor, to define the rules, is the dividing line between a small boss and a true great leader. While Cao Cao was busy controlling the imperial court, Liu Bei's life was becoming increasingly difficult. He had taken over Su province. On the surface, he finally had territory of his own. But in reality, he was sitting on pins and needles. In order to resist Yuan Shu, Liu Bei had no choice but to take in the unpredictable Lu Bu. This was Liu Bei's helplessness. In order to survive, he had to dance with a wolf. And as expected, the result was disastrous. As soon as Liu Bei left to fight Yuan Shu, Lu Bu attacked Su province from behind. He seized Liu Bei's wife and children. In an instant, Liu Bei was thrown back to where he had started. He could only station himself at Xiaopei, almost like a gatekeeper under Lu Bu. But it was in this desperate situation that the famous scene of discussing heroes over warm wine took place. After Cao Cao destroyed Lu Bu, he brought Liu Bei back to Xuchang. In order to avoid Cao Cao's suspicion, Liu Bei spent every day planting vegetables in the back garden, pretending to be a man with no great ambition. One day, when the plums were yellow and the rain was falling, Cao Cao invited Liu Bei to drink. When the wine had reached the middle of the feast, Cao Cao suddenly asked, "Xuanda, you have traveled across the realm. You must know who the heroes of this age are." Liu Bei pretended to be foolish. He listed names such as Yuan Shao, Yuan Shu, Liu Biao, and others. Cao Cao rejected them one by one. Finally, he pointed at Liu Bei, then pointed at himself, and said the sentence that nearly frightened Liu Bei out of his soul. "In all the world, the true heroes are only you and I." This was not merely a test. This was top-level psychological warfare. Cao Cao had an extremely accurate eye for people. He knew that Liu Bei was a hidden dragon, and sooner or later, this dragon would rise into the sky. At that moment, thunder suddenly roared. The chopsticks in Liu Bei's hand fell to the ground. He immediately used the thunder as an excuse, saying that he had dropped them because he was afraid of the storm. This one small fall revealed Liu Bei's survival wisdom. Show weakness. When facing an opponent whose strength is far greater than your own, exposing ambition is the same as seeking death. Only by disguising yourself as a harmless white rabbit can you numb the vigilance of the tiger. Although Liu Bei escaped danger this time, he knew that Xuchang was a den of tigers and wolves. He could not stay there for long. Soon, an opportunity finally came. Yuan Shu wanted to move north and join Yuan Shao. Liu Bei volunteered to lead troops and intercept him. Cao Cao, careless for a moment, allowed the tiger to return to the mountain. Once Liu Bei left the city, he was like a bird entering the forest, like a fish returning to the sea. He would never come back. By the time Cao Cao regretted it, there was nothing he could do. At this point, the situation in the north had already become clear. Gongsun Zan had been destroyed by Yuan Shao. Yuan Shao had unified the lands north of the Yellow River. He commanded several provinces, possessed vast armies, and controlled enormous resources. At that time, he was the absolute giant among the warlords. Cao Cao, although he occupied the central plains, was surrounded by enemies on all sides. His forces were not even 1/10 of Yuan Shao's. A collision between these two great groups was inevitable. This led to one of the most famous battles in Chinese history, a battle where the few defeated the many. The Battle of Guandu. The clouds of war gathered. Yuan Shao issued a proclamation denouncing Cao Cao. Chen Lin's famous essay attacking Cao Cao was said to be so fierce that even Cao Cao's headache was cured after reading it. This shows the power of public opinion warfare. But a well-written article is not enough. The real question is how the leader acts. On the eve of the decisive battle, Yuan Shao revealed all the weaknesses in his character. He had many advisors, but could not make decisions. He favored people because of personal ties. He was rigid, arrogant, and unwilling to listen. Tian Feng advised him to fight a long war. Yuan Shao threw Tian Feng into prison. Su Yu suggested a surprise attack on Xuchang. But because Su Yu's family had broken the law, Yuan Shao wanted to punish him instead. Now look at Cao Cao. Although he was at an absolute disadvantage, he pushed the ability to listen to advice to the extreme. During the stalemate between the two armies, one event changed the entire battlefield. Su Yu came to Cao Cao's camp at night. Su Yu had been one of Yuan Shao's advisors. But after being forced into a desperate position, he changed sides and came to Cao Cao. When Cao Cao heard that Su Yu had arrived, he rushed out of the camp to greet him. He did not even have time to put on his shoes. Barefoot, he ran out, held Su Yu's hands, and laughed. "Ziyuan, you have come. My great task can now be accomplished." This scene captured Cao Cao's hunger for talent with extraordinary force. Su Yu brought the most important intelligence. Yuan Shao's grain supplies were all stored at Wuchao. And the defenses there were weak. This was a fatal system vulnerability. Cao Cao did not hesitate for even a moment. He personally led 5,000 elite cavalry and launched a night raid on Wuchao. That fire burned Yuan Shao's millions of measures of grain. It also burned away Yuan Shao's dream of domination. The Battle of Guandu was not only a military victory. It was a victory of organizational efficiency. Yuan Shao lost because his management was chaotic. His internal factions were divided. His people undermined one another. Cao Cao won because his decision-making was flat, his execution was strong, and he dared to gamble when the moment required it. This gives modern managers a clear lesson. The life and death of an enterprise often does not depend on its size. It depends on the flexibility of its decision-making mechanism. In an age where the fast devour the slow, hesitation is the greatest original sin of a leader. Yuan Shao held a winning hand. But because of hesitation and indecision, he lost everything. Cao Cao was about to swallow the lands of Hebei and become the true overlord of the north. But at this moment, he did not yet know that far away in the south, there was a dangerous fish that had slipped through his net, a man he himself had once called a hero, who was preparing an even greater counterattack. When the smoke of the Battle of Guandu faded, the sky of the north had completely changed color. Cao Cao had swallowed Yuan Shao's inheritance and become the absolute giant of that era. But our other main figure, Liu Bei, was living a life that only became more miserable. Once again, he had been beaten into defeat. He fled in embarrassment to Jingzhou and lived under the protection of his kinsman Liu Biao. By this time, Liu Bei was already nearly 50 years old. In ancient times, this was already the age when a man was supposed to understand the mandate of heaven. One day, while drinking with Liu Biao, Liu Bei stepped away to relieve himself. There, he noticed that the flesh on his thighs had grown back. He could not help but burst into tears. This was the famous moment known as the flesh returning to the thighs. Inside those tears was the anxiety of a middle-aged man facing crisis. Even more, it was the sorrow of a man whose ambition had not yet been fulfilled. Although he had top warriors such as Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, and Zhao Yun beside him, Liu Bei still lacked the one thing he needed most: a true strategic brain. Next chapter continues.